Ocean literacy is understanding the ocean's influence on us and our influence on the ocean. As an ocean literate person, you understand the essential principles and fundamental concepts, can communicate about the ocean in a meaningful way, and make informed and responsible decisions regarding the ocean and its resources. One of the barriers to people becoming more ocean literate is the ocean's perceived remoteness. Even those living close to it may not see beyond the surface. As sail trainers, we are well placed to break down that barrier for the young people we take out. But as a sail trainer, you may feel reticent about taking that task on. This is the first of a series of informal fireside chats between sail trainers and specialists to help you to know enough to open your young people's minds to the ocean. Plankton is at the base of the marine food web, and taking a bit of your program to look at it should get them to wow, and eager to know more, as the images in this slideshow demonstrate. I'm John Hepburn, and I manage the Island Trust's Ocean Discoverability Project, which takes ocean literacy to disabled children in Devon and Cornwall. This session took place on the Island Trust's gaff yawl, Moosk, in Plymouth Yacht Haven on 22nd of May 2021, under COVID social distancing restrictions on a cold and windy but thankfully dry afternoon. We didn't manage to cover everything before Zoom turned us into pumpkins, so there are some additions at the end. Welcome to Moosk, the Island Trust's smallest boat, for this session on plankton for sail trainers. And we have with us Andy astern, who's a very experienced sail training skipper. Vaishali, who sat next to him, who, like me, is a Marine Conservation Society sea champion and potential onboard ocean educator. And Dave Conway, who is an expert on plankton, with a 10-minute talk from Dave. Then we'll do a bit of plankton trawling, just to see how it works on a boat like this, and then we'll look at some plankton, and then there'll be a chance to have a chat and to talk.
If you don't know what plankton is, it's very loosely defined as any organisms either in the sea or also in fresh water that just float around at the mercy of tides and currents. They can't swim any real distance like a fish can. So you got a great variety of things, as you can see in the image there. There's different sorts of, there's some animals, there's also some algae. And it's particularly important because it's at the bottom of the food chain in the sea, and it's what all the animals in the sea depend on to feed. Things like young fish will feed on some of these organisms, and then larger organisms will feed on the fish, and then it goes on up to even basking sharks feeding on the plankton, whales feeding on the plankton. But the fisheries side is very important because although we don't really realise it in Britain, in other countries, fisheries are a major part of the food. Because the fisheries are really important. If you walk up, say, through towns on the west coast of Africa, in Senegal, you'll find the markets are just full of dried fish. They're dried, of course, to preserve them so that they can transport them around the country. And that's the basis of their food. They can't afford expensive meat like we can here. We could probably do without fish, but many countries in the world, all in the Far East too, very dependent on fish. There we go. Right, if you want to catch any plankton, just need to pull a net through the water and then look what you've got collected under a microscope, a fine net like this one here. This one is actually just streaming in a current, but normally I'd pull it along in a rope and catch a lot of things, put them in little dishes and put them under the microscope and identify them. Next one. And you're going to catch a lot of different things. There's a couple of groups here. Two of the major groups are the phytoplankton and the zooplankton. The phytoplankton, very beautiful little organisms. The four on the left are diatoms, and the two on the right are dinoflagellates. You can tell they're dinoflagellates. You may see long flagella just behind them or to the side of them. And they can swim short distances with these. The diatoms don't swim. They stay near the surface of the water by making themselves buoyant using lipids and fats inside them. That helps them keep near the surface. Now they need to be near the surface because they photosynthesize, and you probably know what that is. It's using the energy of the sunlight and the carbon dioxide, taking up carbon dioxide and nutrients from the water to grow and produce complex molecules such as carbohydrates, sugars, and also eventually fats and proteins. On the right are zooplankton animals. There's just a variety there. The top left hand one is a mollusk. You can see the coiling. It's not like most snail shells. It's a very flattened species, that. On the right of that is a polychaete worm, which is segmented with lots of little cilia. On the middle left is a lobster larvae, and below that is a copepod. It may be a group that you don't know much about, but they're very important to see, very numerous, and I'll mention them again later. The two bottoms on the right are a couple of jellyfish. Jellyfish you probably think of as the large gelatinous organisms you find in beaches, but we actually only have six large jellyfish species around the British coast. These small ones that you see there are a slightly different group, but we've got, in Plymouth alone, we've got 52 different species of these. But around the UK, there's over 100. Again, a very important group. Okay, John, next one. Now, I mentioned that phytoplankton photosynthesizes, and it's green. And this is a sample that was taken off Plymouth just over a week ago, and you can see the greenness in it. Of course, it absorbs carbon dioxide, releases oxygen, which is very important to us, of course, because half the oxygen that we breathe comes actually from phytoplankton in the sea. So you could say that every second breath we take comes from phytoplankton in the sea. Unfortunately, we're producing more carbon dioxide than can be absorbed. So the Earth is warming because the carbon dioxide is forming a sort of insulated layer around the world, which is keeping the heat in. So we're getting slightly warmer. But if it wasn't for the algae, these algae, phytoplankton in the sea, things would be an awful lot worse. Bioluminescence. This is a really interesting phenomenon in the sea. We know of it on land by things like fireflies, you may be aware of them. There are various other things like some of the fungi.
Like a beer.
Also photosynthesize. Sorry, also bioluminesce. And if you actually have some rotten meat and leave it around for a time, it also glows. The bacteria in it can bioluminesce. And on the left are a species called Noctiluca scintillans. They're actually a dinoflagellate, but they don't have chlorophyll. They can't photosynthesize. They feed by engulfing things. You can perhaps see the big flagella sticking out some of them. They're also called sea sparkle because they bioluminesce. If you've ever been down the beach when there's a lot of these around, the waves that are breaking will be all like fire rolling over as the waves break. Or up on the beach, sometimes they'll be sort of sparkling all over the sand. But if you've ever been out, say, in a yacht at night when it's sort of calm, if you look behind the yacht, you'll see a great trail of light. And this is all the animals and plants and algae in the sea which bioluminesce. Just the movement of the water excites them, and they produce this bioluminescence. We don't know why a lot of them do it, but it's extremely common in the sea. It's uncommon on land, extremely common on sea. Now, many of the animals also in the sea bioluminesce, and this is an instance here of krill, which has got little photophores on below it. You can see these red spots on the bottom, in below its body. They're in a pattern, so it might be to do with finding a mate, or it might be to do with shoring. But lots and lots of animals bioluminesce. Okay. Now, it's very beautiful, a lot of this plankton. Beautiful structures. You can see here a whole variety of organisms. And this has actually inspired architects in their buildings. Some of the domes they've built has been inspired by phytoplankton structure. But also engineers they sometimes, when they have got problems to solve various engineering problems, they look to the natural world and look how animals have constructed things to make them strong. And this has inspired engineers too to build things. But artists as well, because they are very beautiful, as you can see, a lot of these things. And at the MBA where I work, we actually have an artist in residence, although she doesn't actually stay there all the time, but she is sort of appointed to the laboratory, so that an artist in residence. And these are copypods. I mentioned them earlier, very important in the sea. They build up lots of lipids inside them, so they're very rich food for other things to feed on, fish, whales, basking sharks, etc. They're extremely numerous. They are almost like the insects of the sea, but the insects on land are one of the most common and abundant multicellular organisms that we'll find. Copypods are much more abundant. They're about 1,000 times more numerous than insects on the land. Okay. Now, these are Syphonophores. They're relations of jellyfish. You may be familiar with the Portuguese man of war. It's a bit better known because it's a very great stinging potential. But all the jellyfish group, the cnidarians, they can all sting. The one on the left is, well, they're both Syphonophores. The one on the left is a colonial one. Different parts of the body have got different functions. The sort of transparent, at the very top, there's a little float, which keeps it near the surface. Below that, there's some clear, that's swimming bells, we call them. They suck in water and pulse them, pump it out again, and sort of pulse the animal along. And below that are feeding and reproductive parts. And this one can grow to about 6 inches long. But there is one species called Pariah, which can grow up to 50 meters long, not a British one, which makes it one of the longest animals in the world. It's not the heaviest animal in the sea. It's not like a blue whale, but it's 50 meters long. It's certainly one of the longest animals on Earth. So, early on, when echo sounders were first made, you'll know what echo sounders is. It sends a signal, an acoustic signal down through the water to the bottom, which then bounces back. The ping bounces back and it's picked up by a receiver. And the length of time it takes for it to go down and come back up tells you what depth the water is. But when they first started using the echo sounders, they saw these shadows on the soundings. And during the day, the shadows were down near the bottom. And then suddenly at night, they come up. And then whenever it got light again, it came down during the day to the bottom. And eventually realized that this was plankton migrating during the night up to the surface. And we surmise it's probably due to avoid predators. They come to the surface at night to feed, to avoid predation. And the sort of organisms that do it are things like copypods that I've mentioned, but also krill. They can migrate very strongly. Even a copypod the size of a grain of rice can migrate a couple of 100 meters. And this is one of the biggest migrations in the world. Millions of tons of plankton moves up and down every night in the sea. We know migrations inland, like the Arctic terns flying from the Arctic to the Antarctic, and whales moving around all over the place, and wildebeest in Africa. But compared to plankton migration, it's nothing. It's like the biomass is moving far less. What's the connection between plankton and a petrol station? Well, over millions of years, plankton, when it died, settled down to the bottom, and all the oils it contained were incorporated into the sediments and muds in the bottom, and these eventually formed rocks, and also gas. And we, of course, now drill down and collect all this and use it for fuel. And but we also get many byproducts from from oil. The road in front of this image, the asphalt comes from a byproduct of the petroleum industry. The tires on that car, the plastics in the car, the clothes the guy's wearing, all things around that garage, all the downpipes in these houses there, the plastic windows, all this comes from plastic. They're all plastic originating from oil, from plankton. John? And this is some of the things there: house paint, shampoo, diesel, medicines, fertilizers, aviation fuel, anesthetics, all plastic products from clothes to heart valves. And just as an example, this is a COVID test kit I used last weekend. You can see everything there is plastic. And you can see by the single line on it that I passed the test. I did consider putting a black line on with a marker pen just to make you worry a bit, but I didn't do that. So you could say our society runs in plankton, really important for all the things I've said, from fish right through to what it originally produced, all the oil products. That's it then, thank you.
Thank you, David.
It's really interesting.
I think something important to get out of this is that Dave knows vast amounts about plankton. You don't need to know an awful lot to know a lot more than most people do. Because certainly when I started doing this thing in Cornubia, I felt very unsure of myself until I realised that the little that I knew was still quite a lot more than anyone else. Dave just talked about Plankton Net. So this is a Plankton Net. This is the sort of basic educational level one. They're actually quite expensive. These are about £60, and the next size up is twice that. It doesn't normally come with the weights at the bottom. We have weights on this one because we're going to do something slightly unusual with it. I've got a normal plankton net up at the bows, and that's just sitting in the tide, as Dave said, collecting plankton. And if you've got a lot of the phytoplankton around, it clogs the net up, and the way to get round that is to do a vertical plankton trawl. So you're actually fishing below the level of the phytoplankton. And so you need to weight the thing to do that. And because boats don't stop, and certainly boats like this don't stop, you heave to, go very slowly, and you drop it over the bows. The boat goes forwards, and as the stern passes over it, you pull it up on a piece of string. Now, we've got the tide going from stern to bows, so what we're going to do is do one quick one of those, just to show you how it's done.
John, just before we start, so you're able to just say the parts of that, because we can probably make those, if they're quite expensive, can we make them on board the boats?
You can. If you go on Amazon, you'll find these things. The British supplier is the Natural History Book Shop. You can go on to eBay and you'll get Indian-made ones, which are much cheaper, but I don't know how good they are. Or if you just go Google, make your own plankton net, you'll find lots of advice on how to make them yourselves in good Blue Peter fashion, with an old wire coat hanger, sticky back plastic, and glue.
And a pair of tights.
and a pair of tights. Yeah. And a jam jar.
Okay.
Andy aft drops the net, and the tide carries it forward. Devishali, ahead of the shrouds, who's going to pick it up. I'm going to take it off her and bring it back to Andy. Now this gives the young people on board the opportunity to improve their communications, cooperation and coordination skills. Andy drops it again, and the whole thing kicks off again. This bit unscrews, and there is lots of plankton, and by the look of it, a whole load of plasticky crud.
Yes.
And probably stuff washed off the pontoon as well, because the tide round here runs at quite a steep angle to the pontoon. So we put that on there. Get some seawater that you prepared earlier and squirt it through. Is that making sense? Yes, it is. There, lose it, and there's our plankton. And so we'll put that in proper scientific circles. They use a watch glass, which are quite expensive, aren't they, Dave?
Yeah.
I tried to blag one off Jack, and you told me how much they cost. So patent Peperium pot, delicious, spread on toast, and makes a really good watch glass. And microscope where we can see that, and the screen. But as you can see, there is a mass of life in there. As the screen share wasn't good enough to show it on board, I took this home and recorded it there. There's some phytoplankton, the circle in the middle, blue strands from bits of rope, lots of water fleas, the occasional copepod. It's quite difficult to see all these things while they're rushing about, and a way around that is to use the pipette to suck up a sample of it and then place individual blobs on a petri dish and look at those on their own. That way the little beasties haven't got anywhere to run.
Oh, that's a cracking picture.
That's better. Now we've got a mollusk there. You can see a little spiral shell and some copepods.
It's a great view from here, chaps.
And something wriggling like billion. What's that, Dave?
I think it's a little worm. Yeah, polychaete worm.
Practicing for the Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah. And I'm afraid as we've just got to the really most exciting part of plankton and looking at it ourselves, Zoom is going to turn us all into pumpkins in a minute. So I'm going to stop sharing. What's the best? Ed asks, Dave, you will know, what's the best conditions for sea sparkle?
It just happened. It's usually when it's quite calm that you'll see it. But it's usually after a period of calm weather when there's been a large bloom of it formed. Sometimes it's around for long periods, but then you never see it for quite a long time. So it's not really predictable, unfortunately. But a calm night is a great dark night. I can't predict it, so you just got to be lucky, and it looks amazing. Bioluminescence in the sea is great. If you're ever out in a boat to see it, and I've been out on boats at sea where in deep ocean where there's lots of little myctophid fish which also make light, and you can see the whole sea is just blue with them just under the surface. So it's quite a spectacular thing, and quite a large scale sometimes. People have reported going through shoals of these fish for 5 or 6 hours, and all the bioluminescence in the sea. So,
is it seasonal?
Yes, it'll be more in the summer, certainly, because most of phytoplankton production is in the warmer weather, of course. In the winter, everything slows down, just like it does in your garden. Grass stops growing, and in the sea, the algae stop reproducing as much during the winter. Some still go on, especially diatoms, but.
And here's a question from Emma from Tectona. What's the best thing we can do on a sail training voyage to reduce any negative impact we might be having on plankton?
There's nothing much you can do. There's so much of it that you can't really cause a problem with on a boat. Well, problems that are mostly in enclosed spaces like in marinas. If there's any fuel or things like spilled around, or a lot of sewage, that can affect the animals and can cause abnormalities, etc. But out in the open sea, there's no real problem. It's just, as I say, around marinas, just cleanliness and good management of them.
And not chucking plastic in the water, which turns into microplastics, which zooplankton environment's taking it for.
Yes, they do. A lot of organisms in the sea filter out plastic materials, because the longer the plastics in the water, the smaller the particles that get broken down.
As I said in the introduction, there were some things we didn't manage to cover during the live stream, which I think will help you if you do want to bring plankton to your people. Firstly, to get to WOW, you need to be able to see what you've caught in your trawl, which involves a microscope. These are not necessarily expensive nor bulky. This is the one I use. It connects to a PC via a USB cable and comes with an adapter to connect to a phone, if you can get the phone app to work. It's very easy to use, but the depth of field makes focusing a challenge, and the LED lights reflect off the surface of the water. This one is no longer available on Amazon, but there are plenty of similar devices under £50, including one which connects by Wi-Fi, which I rather fancy. You'll also need some petri dishes, specimen containers and pipettes. Also cheap are magnifiers which clip on your phone. I've seen people using these on rockpool rambles, but I suspect that handheld wouldn't be steady enough for plankton. You can go upmarket, stay digital and spend £200 or more. This one we bought from Brunel, microscope specialists in Bristol. You do get better images, but you have to use their imaging software rather than Microsoft Camera, and that has problems. It is also heavy and bulky. Having got them to wow, the next thing you'll want to know is what they're looking at. Luckily there are some guides. Dave Conway, who gave the talk on the live stream, has written 3 volumes which are free to download, and the URLs are on the screen. But you can also Google them using marine zooplankton of southern Britain. There's a lot to get through there, but I keep printed copies of the first few pages handy, which helps you get a first stab at what sort of beast you're looking at. Here's an example. Dave is working on a photo ID guide. There is a photo guide, Larynx and Vestida's Coastal Plankton, currently £28.16 from Amazon. There's a lot in it. It covers both phyto and zooplankton, and it does assume a bit of prior knowledge, which you can get from the introduction. Glossy coffee table book on plankton is Richard Kirby's Ocean Drifters, currently £11.70 from Amazon. It's not a challenging read, and the photos are stunning. Richard founded the Secchi Disc Foundation, running possibly the world's biggest citizen science project to measure phytoplankton around the ocean. Have a look at www.secchidisc.org. Make yourself a Secchi Disc, download the app, and get measuring and reporting. Ocean literacy is so important that anyone who can do something about it should, and that includes us in the sail training community. Make including ocean literacy in your voyages your contribution to the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. If you want to know more about the Island Trust and ocean discoverability, see our website or email me at john@theislandtrust.org.uk.